in the other, the smoke still sewn into my coat like a stubborn memory. The porch light threw a halo over her perfect hair and white cardigan, a catalog angel opening a black door to judgment. She glanced at the soot on my sleeve the way you'd notice lint on a beige couch and said, "You can't stay here, Mom. You'll ruin the aesthetic." The door closed softly like a velvet hammer. That was the sound of something breaking I hadn't known was still intact. I found a $28 room at the Oak View Inn, wet carpet. Thin towels, a mirror, cracked into a dozen kinder versions of me, and sat on the bed until the clock clicked to 2 a.m., the red digits blinking like an accusation. I am not a crier. Even when I buried my sister with no family beside me, even when the Buick coughed its last on a rain-bitten morning before a double shift at the diner, I kept my tears like spare change, small, hidden, counted. But that night, the silence was too heavy to carry, and I let it slip one quiet sob at a time, because the truest thing had finally stepped into the light. I had become an eyesore in the life I built. Morning pushed me out the door, and my feet walked me back to Oakwood Terrace, the 2-bedroom clapboard house, where I raised Emily with a chain-link fence and dandelions that made a kingdom for a 10-year-old. Velma was on her porch, shelling peas into a metal bowl that sang when green met tin. "Maggie Walker!" she shouted, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her just enough the motel, the fire that ate all my photographs, the golden porch light that turned me away, until she squinted and cut through it the way she always did. "You still got fight in you, sugar. You just forgot how to throw a punch." I lay awake that night and let her words settle like grit in a pearl. I listed the shifts I had worked dawn grease at the diner, night needles at the tailor shop. I saw Emily at 12 with a science trophy at 16, with a jaw like flint at 18, leaving for a scholarship with a hug that felt like a receipt. Around 4 a.m., I opened the little black notebook I kept in my purse, the one with neat columns of survival old certificates of deposit stocks that crawled instead of ran, sewing money tucked in envelopes behind soup cans. I added and re-added. Not enough for revenge, I wrote, but enough for a beginning. 2 weeks later, I stood on a marsh view lawn in front of a house with white columns and a wraparound porch that had once lived on a magazine page Emily circled as a girl and whispered one day. I bought it in cash, the word landing in my chest like a gavel. Fresh paint glowed. The for sale sign tilted in the light like a dare. I took a picture and texted it to her. No caption, no flourish, just a mirror held up to the life she curated, like a mood board. The phone rang in less than 5 minutes. "Mom, why did you send me that house?" she asked, the tightness in her voice trying to hold back a tide. "Because I bought it," I said. Silence a fragile bridge, and then it's yours. It could be, I answered, and tasted a calm I hadn't felt in years. Or I could sell it. Her inhale hit the line like glass. "Why would you do that? Because, sweetheart," I said, and I could hear my own voice steady as a plumb line. "It fits your aesthetic." I hung up before the plea or the anger or the apology could arrive, and for the first time since the fire, I smiled. What I didn't know then was how many locked rooms still waited inside that house, how the floors remembered how the walls kept their secrets, and how one attic box would change the way I understood my daughter, my husband, and the kind of love that can both save and scorch a life. I walked the rooms like a trespasser in my own decision, letting my fingertips read the house the way you read Braille. And by mid-morning, the light in the dining room fractured through the chandelier into a storm of tiny rainbows that made me think of promises we forget we made to ourselves. I was in the sunroom with a paper cup of cold coffee when I heard tires crackle over gravel, and then the kind of hush a house takes when it holds its breath. The front door opened, heels clicked across wood like small gunshots. A pause, a searching, and then her voice low and cautious as if the place might bite. "You really bought this," she said, eyes skimming the crown, molding the wainscoting, the postcard view of marsh, like a solution to a problem she hadn't admitted she had. I nodded and let the silence do the heavy lifting. Why she asked, and her face blurred for a heartbeat, something crumpling, then smoothing like a bedsheet pulled tight. "Because you told me I ruined your aesthetic," I said, leaning back in the wicker chair, "so I found one that suits you." Her shoulders lifted into the armor she wears when a room is full and she needs to be the sharpest thing in it. "This isn't funny, Mom," she said, every syllable ironed flat. "You sent me a picture of a house you knew I loved and then stuck a for sale sign in front like a threat." I kept my gaze steady and my hands still. "I thought you liked signs," I said, and when she blinked, I added, "It isn't revenge. It's a mirror." The word hung between us, reflecting 1,000 unflattering angles until she exhaled and for the first time in years let the truth peek through her polish. "You don't understand how things are now," she whispered. "My world is curated, structured. Everything has a place, a look, a standard, and you don't fit in that. You say things you don't think about how it sounds. You don't blend." I felt the ache rise and made it sit. "I didn't raise you to blend," I said. "I raised you to stand tall." I watched the sentence land and break something loose behind her eyes. Then I reached into the drawer where I had tucked the dusty box I'd rescued before the fire took the rest. Paper is a stubborn kind of memory. It survives out of sheer will. I handed her an envelope worn at the corners, Daniel's name on the flap, a date that startled the room into a deeper hush. She hesitated as if paper could burn, then unfolded the letter and let her eyes move over the slope and rush of his handwriting. I sat beside her without touching, letting the words do what I no longer could. He had written about fear and failure, about God and bookstores and roads that loop back on themselves if you're stubborn enough to keep walking. He had written about knocking on doors and being told he wasn't needed. He had written our names the way men write prayers. Her lips barely moved. He called when I was 16, she said, knees giving out, so she fell into the couch with the slow shock of someone realizing they've been keeping time to the wrong clock. He wanted to come back. I told him to leave. She covered her mouth like you do when the truth is sudden and loud. "I wanted to protect you. I thought I was fixing it." I let out the breath I hadn't known I was holding since the night the Buick died in the rain, and said there's more than one way to ruin a home, Emily. Sometimes it's not fire. Sometimes it's silence. We sat with that like it was a third person in the room, a witness and a judge. She reached for my hand and flinched, then tried again and held on her fingers cold as river glass. "I don't deserve this house," she said, and the confession loosened something tight in the air. "That's not for me to decide." I answered, though I could feel fate circling like a hawk. She looked around at the light at the floorboards that complained with history at the window, where the marsh widened into an old green promise, and asked, "What if I wanted to earn it?" I didn't say yes, and I didn't say no. I watched a cloud pass over the water and leave a darker stripe like underlining, and said, "Then we start again." But the house had more to say, and there was one envelope neither of us had opened yet buried in a bottom corner, like a fuse waiting for the match. I found the envelope by accident the next morning tucked beneath a stack of brittle photographs in that same box I'd carried through the fire. The seal was yellowed, the tape brittle enough to crumble between my fingers. I hadn't noticed it before, maybe because I wasn't ready to. The handwriting on the front froze me in place, Daniel's. Not from 30 years ago, but dated only 4 years earlier. For a moment, the world narrowed to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the slow creak of the floorboards under my knees. When I unfolded it, his words were slanted, hurried, desperate, as if he were still running from the ghosts he made. "Maggie," it began, "if this finds you, it means I finally found the nerve to try again." He wrote of redemption and cowardice of a decade spent trying to become a man worth remembering. He said he'd come to see us twice, but Emily had turned him away both times. She said you'd moved on, that you didn't need me, that I'd only bring pain. The page trembled in my hands. I read it 3 times before my eyes blurred. He'd tried, he'd come back, and my daughter, in her 16-year-old righteousness, had slammed that door before I even knew he'd knocked. I pressed the paper to my chest and rocked like a woman holding something too fragile to name. The ache that rose wasn't anger, it was grief, given a second life. He had found God, found small joys, found love again, lost it again, And through it all, he'd written to me as though his words could travel through time and make me whole. His last line broke me wide open. If I don't see you again in this life, know that I never stopped hoping for one more chance. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I packed a bag called Velma to feed her cat while I was gone and drove west toward Tennessee. I hadn't been on a road trip alone in decades. The highways rolled out before me like old film reels, gas stations with flickering signs, diners where the coffee could wake the dead towns, where everyone waved like they already knew your story. I let the windows down and let the air move through me, stripping away the years until I felt 20 again, searching for something I'd lost before I even knew it mattered. By the time I reached the address in the letter, a small one-story house with faded blue shutters, it was dusk. The light was soft, forgiving. A for rent sign leaned in the yard. My heart sank. I knocked anyway. A woman in her 40s answered her expression, cautious but kind. "I'm looking for Daniel Walker," I said, though I already knew. She hesitated, eyes softening. "I'm sorry," she said. "He passed away last spring. Pancreatic cancer." It was quick. The words hit me like cold water. I just stood there holding the memory of a man who had once smelled of sawdust and Sunday mornings. Then she asked, "Are you Maggie?" When I nodded, she smiled like she was handing me back something I'd dropped. "He talked about you all the time, said you were the one that got away. He left something for you." Inside the house smelled of lemon oil and old books. She led me to a small wooden box on a shelf near the window. Inside were photographs me and Emily when she was little, a pressed flower from our wedding, and one final letter. "You were my lighthouse," it read, "even when I drifted. If this is all that's left, I hope you know you were home to me." I didn't cry right away. I just sat there in the fading light until the tears came on their own, soft and steady. He was gone, but somehow he'd brought me back to myself. By the time I reached Charleston again, the sky was a bruise of blue and gold. Emily's car was already in the driveway. She was sitting on the porch steps, knees pulled to her chest, makeup streaked like watercolor. When she saw me, she stood eyes red and whispered, "I know about the letter." I nodded, too tired to pretend. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "I thought he didn't deserve you." I looked at her, really looked, and saw the girl who used to fall asleep with her head on my lap during summer storms. "I forgave him," I said quietly. She swallowed a sob. "Can you forgive me?" I didn't answer. "Not yet. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, it's a slow thaw." "Not today," I said, "but maybe soon." The porch light flickered above us, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. It felt like both a beginning and an ending, and I finally understood that healing doesn't come in a single moment. It comes in layers, and ours was just starting to unfold. The next morning, the air outside smelled of rain and something cleaner like possibility. Emily knocked on my motel door just after 8 a.m., holding 2 coffees and a look I hadn't seen in years, hesitant, hopeful. "Can we talk?" she asked, and I simply nodded. We drove to the house together, the silence between us fragile, but alive. When we pulled into the driveway, the for sale sign still leaned at a slight angle, as if it had been waiting for us. Inside the house no longer felt like mine alone. It felt like a blank page waiting for both of us to write something new. We started with paint. Emily stood in the living room, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, her expensive manicure already chipped. She dipped the roller into a tray of soft yellow and said, "This color feels like warmth." I smiled because she was right, it did. We painted through the morning, 2 women who had run out of words, finding forgiveness in brushstrokes. Velma dropped by with sandwiches and sass. "You 2 look like you're in one of them home makeover shows," she said, hands on hips. Emily laughed, really laughed, and I swear it was the first time that sound had filled the room in decades. That night, sitting on the porch swing, Emily leaned her head on my shoulder like she used to when she was small. "I want to do something good with this place," she said. "Something that makes up for everything." I waited, sipping my tea, watching the marsh shimmer under the moonlight. What kind of something? She hesitated. There are women out there like you were, women with nowhere to go when life decides they don't fit anymore. What if this house could be for them? I turned to her. A shelter. No, she said, shaking her head. A home. A chance. A place to start over. I thought of all the nights I'd spent wondering where I belonged and felt something shift deep in my chest. Then let's build it, I said. We called it Rose Harbor, a home for women left behind by husbands, by children, by time. Emily filed the papers, met with city officials, even set up a fund. She worked harder than I'd ever seen her, her determination burning bright where pride used to live. I watched her trade her pristine routines for sleepless nights and paint-stained hands, and I knew then that she wasn't just rebuilding a house, she was rebuilding herself. The first residents arrived in early spring. Sandra, a retired nurse whose son had turned her away after she broke her hip. Denise, a teacher who'd been living in her car after her husband emptied their savings. They came with little more than a few bags and the kind of quiet that comes from too many locked doors. Emily greeted each woman personally, offering blankets, tea, and something rarer dignity. I saw her kneel beside Sandra's wheelchair, tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and whisper, "You're safe here." It undid me. The same girl who once turned me away at her door was now opening hers to others. One night after the lights had gone out and the house settled into that deep hush of safety, Emily found me in the sunroom staring out at the marsh. "Do you think they'll stay?" she asked softly. "If we do this right," I said, "they won't just stay, they'll heal." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "And us," she whispered. I reached over, took her hand, and said, "We're healing too, baby. One day at a time." But I didn't know that something else, someone else, was about to enter our story. Because just when I thought every secret had been unearthed, the past found one more way to knock on our door. It was a phone call from Nashville that stirred the past back to life. The number blinked on my screen just after 3 p.m., and for a moment, I almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end was gentle, tremulous. "Mrs. Walker, my name's Lila. I was Daniel's nurse before he passed." My breath hitched. "He asked me to reach out if I ever found your number," she said. He left something behind for you. Something private." 2 days later, a small brown package arrived at Rose Harbor, wrapped in careful paper, Daniel's name scrawled in the corner. Inside was a leather journal, soft from years of touch, the edges frayed like an old Bible. On the first page, in that same hurried script, he'd written to the woman who carried me in her heart, even when I was too lost to return. I didn't open it right away. I waited until nightfall when the house was quiet and the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and chamomile tea. Emily sat across from me on the floor, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap. I looked at her, and she nodded silently. Together, we turned the page. Each entry was a confession, a love letter, and a map. Daniel wrote about the day he left the way fear had eaten him alive, how every road afterward felt like penance. He wrote about the bookstore where he found peace in the smell of paper and ink, about the church where he'd lit a candle for us every Sunday. And then there was the part that made Emily crumble. I came to her graduation. I stood behind the fence, watched her in that blue robe, so proud, so much like her mother. I didn't go inside. I didn't think I deserved to. Emily pressed her forehead to the page and sobbed, not the sharp kind that slices through silence, but the broken kind that mends while it falls apart. I reached for her hand. "He saw us," I whispered. "All this time, he saw us." At the end of the journal was one last line. "Tell Emily I never stopped loving her. Tell her I forgave her. Tell her I understand." We buried the journal the next morning beneath the magnolia tree in the back garden under a bench we'd painted pale blue. No marker, no plaque, just roots and memory. When we stood up, Emily's face was streaked with dirt and tears. "He knows what we've built," she said, voice trembling. "I think he does," I answered because I truly believed he did. Weeks passed and Rose Harbor began to hum with life. More women arrived, each with stories folded into their suitcases. Ruth, 82, a retired jazz singer who still hummed when she walked. Maria, a former librarian who refused to sleep without a book by her pillow. Every room filled with laughter, tears, and the clinking of teacups. Emily thrived among them, her perfection replaced by purpose. She led meetings, fixed leaky faucets, even learned to cook on a budget. Sometimes I'd find her in the kitchen apron dusted with flower hair, wild singing along to Ruth's scratchy records. It felt like home. Ours, theirs, everyone's. But joy is fragile, and grief likes to remind us that it never leaves entirely. One evening, Ruth collapsed in the hallway. The sound of her fall tore through the house like a lightning strike. Emily froze, eyes wide with terror, but I didn't hesitate. I dropped to my knees, cradled Ruth's head, and whispered, "I've got you, sweetheart. You're not alone." We rode with her to the hospital, the night air sharp with fear. Emily's hands shook the whole way. "She looked like you," she whispered. When she fell, I thought her voice broke and I squeezed her hand. "She's still here. So am I." Ruth came home 5 days later, weaker, but smiling, her spirit still defiant. She asked for one thing: to sit on the porch swing and sing. The sun was rising when she started misty, her voice thin but steady. Halfway through the song, her breath caught, and then she was gone. Emily held her hand until the very end. We buried Ruth's ashes in the garden under a rose bush that now blooms every spring. That night, Emily crawled into my bed like she used to as a child, silent tears soaking the pillow. I held her until she fell asleep, my heart breaking and healing all at once. Because sometimes love doesn't ask to be perfect, it just asks to stay. The morning after Ruth's funeral, the house was quieter than usual, as if even the walls were grieving. I found Emily in the sunroom, wrapped in one of Ruth's crocheted shawls, staring at the marsh through the glass. "I want to write about this place," she said softly, "about the women, about you." I smiled. "Then start with your own story," I told her. She turned to me, eyes wet but steady. "Do you think anyone would want to hear it?" "Yes," I said, "because your story built this house." Weeks passed and peace crept back in on soft feet. The local paper ran an article about Rose Harbor, a photo of us standing on the porch, surrounded by the women who called it home. The headline read, "From Rejection to Redemption, a Charleston mother and daughter build hope." Velma barged in, waving the newspaper like a trophy. "Look at y'all front page and everything," she hollered. Emily blushed. I just laughed because I barely recognized the woman in that picture, smiling, unafraid, whole. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. It wasn't a donation or a visitor, just a boy, maybe 16, clutching an envelope like it might bite him. "You, Margaret?" he asked. When I nodded, he handed it to me and ran off before I could speak. Inside was a letter written in careful penmanship. "Mrs. Walker, you don't know me, but I knew your husband. He worked with my mother at the bookstore. He gave me this letter months before he passed, told me to deliver it when the time felt right. I saw the news about Rose Harbor. Now I know what he meant." I unfolded it slowly. Daniel's handwriting was weaker this time, shaky, but it was his. "Maggie, if you're reading this, it means someone braver than me brought it to you. I wish I could have said these words in person, but life rarely gives us the endings we want, only the ones we make. You turned pain into purpose. You built a home out of heartbreak. I didn't deserve your forgiveness, but you gave it anyway. I see it in this house, in your daughter, in every woman you've helped. You finished the story we started. Always yours, D." I pressed the letter to my chest and wept, not the broken kind this time, but the kind that washes everything clean. That night, I called Emily onto the porch. The moon hung low over the marsh, and the air smelled of gardenias. I handed her the letter. She read it in silence, one hand covering her mouth. When she finished, she leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "He never stopped trying to fix it, did he?" "No," I said, "and neither did you." With Daniel's small inheritance, his pension, a few book royalties, a modest insurance policy, we expanded Rose Harbor 2 new bedrooms, a shared kitchen, a writing room overlooking the water. We named it Daniel's Room, not out of guilt, but gratitude. The story spread beyond Charleston news stations, church groups, even a woman from the New York Times called. Donations poured in, but what mattered most were the people. Women who'd been told they were too old, too broken, too much, now laughing in the kitchen, playing piano in the evenings, planting roses in the garden Ruth once sang beneath. One night during a candlelit dinner, someone asked what Rose Harbor really was. A shelter, a home, a miracle. Emily smiled and said, "It's everyone." And she was right. Every tear, every scar, every second chance had built this place. That fall, I found one last letter tucked under my porch pillow. No name, no return address, just one word. Margaret. It was from a law office in Tennessee. Daniel had named me the beneficiary of his estate, with a portion set aside for the continuation of the love that was never lost, only misplaced. I cried again because somehow, even after death, he found a way home. Now every evening I sit on the porch swing with Emily beside me, watching the sun melt into the marsh. Laughter drifts from the kitchen, warm light spills across the floor, and the air hums with life. We didn't erase the pain we built around it. We turned what broke us into something that shelters others. I used to think redemption knocked only once, but I know better now. Sometimes you have to build the house yourself and leave the door open. If you've ever been turned away, if you've ever felt like you no longer fit, I want you to remember this. Your story isn't over. You are not too late. You can still come home. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and tell